media, the fawning corporate media, as Ray McGovern calls it.
Well, they certainly are fawning. And if you just joined us, Visas for Al-Qaeda, CIA handouts that rock the world, J. Michael Springman. Let's go back and look at this, because do you feel vindicated now, before we walk through it, that you do have the head of the 9/11 Commission coming out and saying they basically covered up, stood down for Saudi Arabia? I mean, that's complicity right there. And it's now even in the New York Post that demonized anyone, including firefighters and police, that questioned 9/11.
Well, it makes me feel a bit better, but then you've got to look at the fact that they've kept a lid on this for 20 years or more now. They've ruined people's lives. They've mocked them in print and so forth. So it's better, but the wheels still haven't come off the wagon, and nobody's in jail and nobody's been executed.
Well, I want to give you the floor right now, as best you can tell. Break down exactly what happened with the hijackers, what your colleagues tried to do, what you reported on and exposed, and then all these years later, what do you think really happened on 9/11?
Okay. Well, going back to me in Jeddah, I had gotten this strange conversation with the then American ambassador, Walter Cutler, who was in town for consultations with State Department officials. And one of the people from the Saudi desk, the people who follow what's going on in a given country, called me and said, Cutler's in town. Do you want to say hello to him? And I said, yeah, sure. I figured it'd be a 5-minute hello and goodbye session. And he spends 45 minutes talking to me about all the problems that my predecessor, Greta Holtz, had created for the embassy in Riyadh. She was refusing visas, so he said, to the servants of rich Saudi women. They're seamstresses, hairdressers, and all these other factotums, and they just couldn't travel without them. And I thought, he's telling me something, but I have absolutely no idea what he's telling me. So when this was over, I talked to the desk officer, and I said, what was that all about? He said, I have no idea. Cutler's just a queer duck. Well, I get off to Jeddah, get all this. I'm welcome with open arms. People tell me, you're such an improvement over Greta Holtz. She was such a bitch. She was a troublemaker. Nobody could get along with her, and so forth. Well, after a bit, I started getting pressure on issuing visas to people who weren't qualified. One guy, or actually two Pakistanis, I think, were going to a trade show. And they couldn't name the trade show in the United States and couldn't tell me what city it was located in. But Paul Arvid Tveit, T-V-E-I-T, a case officer, according to namebase.org, who was working undercover at the commercial section, called me and demanded visas for these guys. And I said, no, they haven't proved that they have any compelling reason to come back either to Saudi Arabia or their own country. So then he calls Justice, given name Stevens, the head of the consular section, and got these guys their visas. And this pretty much went on for the 18 months or so that I was in Jeddah. Nobody could explain this. And the odd thing was Eric Qualkenbush, the Qualkenbush, the head of the CIA base at the consulate, he came to me and said, Mike, we've got this Iranian agent. We want him in Washington for consultations. We really need to have him there. Can you issue him a visa? Wink, wink. Well, the guy had a clean passport. He had previous visas to go to the United States in it. He was working at, or running, in fact, the family had a Oriental rug shop in the town. And he was going to visit clients. He had their names there on a sheet of paper on company letterhead. He talked about what he was going to do there. He answered all my questions. And I issued him a visa. And I said, good God, send me more people like him. And I still to this day don't know why Qualkenbush tipped me the wink about this guy, but said not a word about all these other people who were really sleazy characters that the agency was sending to the U.S. for training to send on to Afghanistan to the war against the Soviets.
So that's why you say this went on 20 years, because this was happening even before 9/11. Now, fast forward from my memory, you end up leaving, but then you've talked to colleagues and find out they were told the same thing with Muhammad Atta and others. Walk us through that. Okay,
well, once I was out, I heard from Joe Trento, the journalist who follows national security issues, that the real reason they wanted visas for these guys was to send them to Afghanistan. They were creating the Mujahideen. And I said, that's why they got so mad when I refused the visas. And I started researching. I started writing letters. I sent letters to everybody involved, including Joseph P. O'Neill, the so-called inspector who came out and really wanted me to tell him what was going on in Jeddah. And he said, I'll protect you. And he didn't. He passed the word to the State Department and the CIA, of whom I think he was a member, to get rid of me. And I had nothing but trouble after that. Once I was out of state, and after I talked to Trento, I had written an article about this, published in Covert Action Quarterly. The hand that rules the visa machine rocks the world. This got me a few interviews. And I tried after that to learn exactly why I had been thrown out of state. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests and a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit around, maybe 1991, 1992, thereabouts, and got nowhere. As time went by, I sent letters to everybody else I had been involved with, Freres and Henry Encher and Karen Sasahara, his successor as political officer, saying what was really going on in Jeddah. Time has gone by, you can tell me. Dead silence. So then I filed a Freedom of Information Act request and ultimately another lawsuit, I guess about 3 years ago now, asking what I should have asked for the first time around. All of the visas that had been overruled by Freres and Justice Stevens. And when I was in Jeddah, the filing cabinets were bulging with old visa applications that nobody had shredded. They were 5, 10, 15 years old. And my staff said to me, look, Mike, if we shred these things like we're supposed to do every year, we're never going to deal with 100 to 200 visa applicants a day we're getting. And we got a choice. You want us to shred documents or you want us to work on these visa applications? So I said, do the visas. And the lawsuit again was dismissed by Reggie Walton, a Bush appointee, a guy who was put onto the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, the secret court. And he first demanded the names of all 45,000 visa applicants a year I was dealing with. And I said, that's impossible. And the state said, well, we shred these documents every year. And I said, that's impossible, and gave them an affidavit about the bulging, overflowing file cabinets. And he simply dismissed the case. And I said, well, I want to know who who shredded these documents, what was their names, what was their rank, when it was done. Don't you people keep records? There's a guy in the British government, Nick Pope, who had written about freedom of information and national security. And he had mentioned that, well, in a big organization, papers go missing, files get misplaced, and so forth. But if you're dealing with government, if you're dealing with national security issues, if you're dealing with major topics like visa applications, these don't go missing. And if they do, there's a very questionable reason for why, and we need to investigate something like this. Well, that prompted me to start writing the book. And in the course of doing the research, I found out that basically, as I began to suspect, the people who were sent to Afghanistan also were sent to Yugoslavia. I found through John Schindler's book, Unholy Terror, that these were some of the guys that had been trained in Afghanistan and fought in Bosnia and were involved with the planning or the execution of September 11th.
Now, let's stop right there. This is so huge. The KLA out of Albania involved taking over areas from Serbia. Serbia fights back. They're called terrorists on the news. NATO bombs them. I'm not saying the Serbs are perfect. The point is that, again, using them as a secret army and then meanwhile using the drug money, from what I've read, to launch the next operation.
That's exactly right. The guys got NATO intelligence. The guys got NATO training. The guys got money and drugs to sell back and forth to finance their operations, just like they did with Iran-Contra. In Michel Chossudovsky's website, there are a number of articles, Global Research Canada, that talk about using drug money to fund the war in Yugoslavia and to destroy the country.
I want to go back to 9/11. And again, we just joined us. Visas for al-Qaeda, the former head of the Jeddah, Saudi Arabian U.S. Embassy visa section, who saw them letting terrorists fly around before, then after, talked to people involved. And he's going to get to that in a moment, and basically said, hey, you know, let these people in. They're not really terrorists. They work for us. I wanted to get back to that in a moment. But to know that they are using al-Qaeda-type groups as secret armies against the Serbs, against our basic liberties, using that threat to take our freedoms, against Syria, Libya, Iraq, I mean, all over the world, this is getting so obvious. What do you make now of the reports by Southcom that ISIS is coming into the Caribbean and Mexico and into the U.S.? Is that just hype to get more government funding, or are they covering their butt?
I don't know for sure. The first I heard of it actually was when you mentioned this on your show just a few minutes ago. I'm inclined to think this is more like George Bush and these other people saying, well, if we don't stop Iran and Ronald Reagan, if we don't stop the Contras in Nicaragua, we're going to have to stop them in Harlingen, Texas. I would suspect that this is basically hype and beating the drums for more security, more removal of personal liberty, and to pump more money into these organizations in the Middle East to destroy the rest of the region. There's still a few people left there who are fighting back. They're doing it in Yemen. Bashar al-Assad, he may not be the world's best president, but
he didn't start the war, and he's certainly better than al-Qaeda, and I won't be able to speak to that. I agreed until about 6 months ago with your view that it's just more hype to get more FBI funding and more Homeland Security funding. The issue is, though, I see them allowing ISIS to recruit 18 and 25-year-olds all over the world, from the U.S., Canada, Europe, England, to Australia, to fly there to fight. It is a proxy army, and I see it being promoted domestically as kind of trendy. And then I ask, are they going to allow ISIS to attack to even take more liberties? It's just getting really, really suspicious.
Yeah, it's conceivable. I mean, when they were recruiting for Afghanistan, there were 52 recruiting offices in the United States for the Mujahideen. They were rounding up Arab Americans to either fund the operation or to be recruited and trained to go and fight in Afghanistan. I was thunderstruck at that. I hadn't heard about that at all, but it was in Peter Bergen's book, The Osama bin Laden I Know.
That's right, and that's now admitted. And, of course, Reagan didn't, I don't want to blame Reagan. He didn't know at the time either, but obviously he had all those meetings at the White House with the Taliban leaders, and, I mean, ridiculous film footage, but, that happened.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to get into the book in the next segment. I skipped a break. We got a few minutes left here. Give us the meat for new audiences that just tuned in because it's so groundbreaking what you were able to discover and talking to your colleagues that were still in the State Department about how many of the hijackers were actually given visas to come into the United States, even though they were on a terrorist list, and what story was given to force the embassy to do that?
Well, as I discovered in researching the book, 15 of the 19 hijackers, according to the Los Angeles Times years ago, got their visas from Jeddah. And I thought I had raised enough hell with my Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and letters and speaking out that they would stop this stuff. But I learned in doing the research that this Shayna Steinger, Steinger, she was hired for my position in Jeddah to issue visas straight out of Columbia University at FSO for a very high rank for someone with no experience, no training, and just a student background. She did this. She issued the visas, gave equivocal answers to the 9/11 Commission, and has since gotten promotions and is still working for the State Department.
Wow. And we know Muhammad Atta then and others were able to go to some other training camps in other part of the world and come back through Saudi Arabia and then into the U.S.
That's what I've seen. These guys moved all around. They gotten visas from the U.S., and if you get a visa from an American consulate or an embassy and you go to another country, they're very quick to issue you a visa because, look, the Americans had investigated them. They have better resources than we do. In addition, they went and they came back. And it removes bars to their travel.
Amazing. Stay there. because this ties into everything we see happening now. The book, Visas for Al-Qaeda, J. Michael Springman. I'm Alex Jones. Stay with us.
We're on the march.